Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'd like to welcome you to episode 224 of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. The FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report is sponsored by Advanced Compliance Solutions. I also wanted to announce that I will have an upcoming FCPA Masterclass in Houston, Texas on January 21 and 22. You can get more information on this Masterclass by checking out my website, Advanced Compliance Solutions. Today I have back with me Matt Kelly. Matt has left the editorship of Compliance Week and has started a new site entitled Radical Compliance. So I visit with Matt on some of his observations of what he sees coming forward in 2016. We really get into the weeds and have a great discussion about Sarbanes-Oxley, Dodd-Frank, compliance, and a plethora of other topics. The episode comes in at just over 33 minutes. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to visiting with you again. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to this episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Today I have back my good friend, Matt Kelly. Matt is the former editor-in-chief of Compliance Week, but he has now moved to become a radical compliance person. So, Matt, with that, welcome. Why don't you tell us what you're up to these days in your new venture?
Sure. Hello, Tom. It's good to be back with you and good to talk with you again. So you are correct that at the end of December, after 10 years as editor of Compliance Week, I left that magazine to start out on my own, and I still wish Compliance Week the best, and I think it is a very good magazine worth any compliance officer's subscription. But I was looking for a more independent platform. So Radical Compliance, which is my blog, radicalcompliance.com, that's really all it is at the moment. It's just a personal blog where I think about and write about compliance issues, pretty wide-ranging material and ideas at the moment. I don't have any particular agenda with this blog at the moment. It's not really a news business per se. I'm not charging any subscription fees. I'm not selling any ads. This is just my compliance views for the world for anybody who would like to read about it. I've got a few interesting tidbits and other links and whatnot that I think are worth the compliance audience knowing about. Some other blogs, including your own, that are worth bookmarketing. Some potentially books to read, events worth considering to go to, and things like that. I might also use it to do more compliance research. Very interested in audit committees these days and the pressures around them, and maybe doing some other sort of private research for private clients as well. But mostly right now it's just a small, rickety platform on the Internet for me to stand up and shout my views out for anybody who might care to listen.
Hey, don't forget the compliance memes, because you're always with very interesting concepts there.
The memes and cartoons are proof that we can all find a couple of ways to goof off during the day, because that's generally when I come up with them. Or if you out there listening have your own meme or cartoon that you like to circulate around, feel free to email it off to me. That's mkelly, K-E-L-L-Y, mkelly@complianceweek.com. And I do have some of those memes listed on the blog now. And whatever's funny and cute about corporate compliance and audit, if it's worthy of a cartoon or a meme, I put it up there.
And I find your lack of documentation disturbing as well.
That is today's meme, and it's worth checking out.
So having seen new Star Wars 3 times, I'm very much in favor of anything Star Wars right now.
All right.
So, Matt, you had a really interesting, I think it was your first column up this year, 6 compliance events to watch in 2016. Could you take us through that and why you picked these 6 and what you might be thinking about?
Sure, yeah. Some of these 6 are very specific. Some of them are more macroeconomic or macro business in scale. I'll just go through them in no particular order. But what I think are some of the really big forces at play here that are going to affect companies, period, and also compliance officers who are going to get swept up in this. Number one is raising or rising interest rates. I think the Federal Reserve will keep raising interest rates throughout the year, not by much, but they will be raising them. For just some perspective there, think of it this way. Nobody under the age of roughly 30 or 32 or so who's at work today, nobody under that age has ever seen what rising interest rates look like. They have always seen interest rates at zero. If you are in financial services, and a world of rising interest rates is very different than a world of flat or falling rates, that imposes a whole new series of risks, not necessarily big ones or bad ones, but just different ones. Nobody under the age of 32 has ever seen that. They don't know how to handle it. So there are issues like that people will need to think about. Also, more specific to businesses where the rubber is going to meet the road is whether the interest rates for high-yield bonds and corporate debt, if that is going to rise. If you see a tightening of the corporate debt market, that actually has really specific implications right away for a lot of companies that they might not have financing that they were expecting. They might need to have, they might have more pressure on their own financial goals that they're going to have to hit to be able to make debt covenants. This could make mergers and acquisitions and the calculations you have there, that could change. And anything like that would affect all company departments, no matter what you're doing, but they will also affect compliance departments. You know, what if you have a merger that isn't going to happen that you've been planning for? What if you feel your company feels increased pressure to meet performance goals because they have higher debt payments they need to make? That's going to change the culture. So there'll be things like that are one risk that's happening. I think the other interesting compliance phenomena out there, the Federal Reserve just before Christmas said that it is going to start reviewing how it might impose new compliance obligations on the banking sector, but they're going to be looking at asymmetric financial risks. I think a big question for the banks in particular is, what does that mean? What is a proper amount of asymmetric financial risk? They're looking at, abnormal systemic risks in the financial sector. Are we defining abnormal systemic risks as something like what we all saw in 2007? Would it be recession in China coupled with lower oil prices? Would it be defaults on student loans that have all been packaged off into student loan-backed securities that people own, and now they're defaulting? That's a smaller example of the mortgage crisis that hit us in 2008. But if the Fed is looking to assess and measure abnormal systemic risks, I think a big question is, how are we going to define that, and how are banks in particular going to respond to it?
Let me stop you there, Matt, because
sure.
You have written extensively about Dodd-Frank, and at least the ones I tend to read are the ones where you talk about what you think works and what perhaps hasn't worked and what perhaps needs changed. How does Dodd-Frank work into that sort of Fed analysis of asystemic risk, or asymmetrical risks?
That's a very good question, because I also recently wrote about Dodd-Frank and its effect on the mortgage business in particular. That the Government Accountability Office recently put out a study saying that while Dodd-Frank compliance has squeezed community banks and credit unions a bit with its compliance burdens, Dodd-Frank compliance has not really disrupted mortgage financing overall. It's not as if fewer mortgages are being issued. Now, I've just refinanced my own house. I know what a pain in the neck it is right now to get a mortgage and to fill out that documentation. It's more now than it was before. But it's not as if the supply of mortgage credit has dried up, and the systemic risks to the financial sector because of bad mortgages, like we saw in 2008, the GAO said that actually has diminished. So there are going to be people, and I'm one of them, who would say this is what Dodd-Frank set out to do, was to lower systemic risk specifically caused by loosey-goosey mortgage lending. Question is, now what is abnormal systemic risk that is not about loosey-goosey mortgage lending? How much is it about student loan financing, which is big, but it's not anywhere near as big as mortgages? What about auto loans? What about, like I said, exposure to corporate debt, to sovereign debt that might be held overseas by countries like Russia, or Argentina when Argentina defaulted on debt. So are there going to be new types of debt that should have been, I guess, better regulated, that Dodd-Frank may or may not have quelled? I would say that Dodd-Frank worked kind of good. I mean, sure, there are still plenty of problems with Dodd-Frank. There's still plenty of problems with, like, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae that have never been addressed about the mortgage industry. But overall, the mortgage industry is a cause of problem for this financial system. That's less. Now, how does Dodd-Frank address other systemic risks? Really? We don't know yet because we haven't really seen what those risks are. That's what the Fed is going to try and get a grip on now, and then we have to connect what Dodd-Frank did with those risks, and we'll see what comes up. We don't know yet, but that's why I listed it as something interesting to watch, because it's a question we haven't really answered yet.
Okay, well, now that we're going full geek here, let me just take it to the next level.
Sure.
Around Mike Oxley and Sarbanes-Oxley, because Mike Oxley, one of the authors of that seminal piece of legislation, died recently, and we both wrote about his passing. But it's also got people to sort of revisit that accounting scandal and what Sarbanes-Oxley was designed to do. So do you have any thoughts on how the corporate reporting would tie into both the perhaps increase in interest rates, but also the reporting of risk that corporations have to do under SOX?
Well, I have always said that SOX was designed or intended to solve a different problem from a different era, which was to address the high level of inaccurate corporate reporting. And when you look at how financial restatements happened after SOX, I would say that SOX did what it was supposed to do. It forced everybody to really look at their corporate reporting and disclose all the errors. So everybody did. We had to let it all hang out. This is 2004, 05. This is the first time we're doing this sort of stuff. Restatements spiked. As companies then got into the nitty-gritty of cleaning up their corporate reporting and their internal control over financial reporting, now 06, 07, 08, you started to see financial restatements go down. You never actually saw financial restatements really driving problems around the financial crisis. The financial crisis was not caused by inaccurate corporate reporting. It was caused by inaccurate risk assessment. Everybody was passing off these loosey-goosey mortgages, and we're repackaging all this loosey-goosey debt, and now everybody's holding it, and we're all saying accurately, we are disclosing that we value this at $100, let's say, when in fact the reality was that it wasn't worth $100, it was worth $20. Or if you invested in mortgage debt from suburban Phoenix, which was a big part of the mortgage mess, it was worth $0. But what drove Dodd-Frank was people not really paying attention to the nuts and bolts of risk management. They made up numbers with no basis in fact. They hoped it was right. They hoped and prayed, and they reported correctly that we're hoping and praying this is right, and then it turned out it wasn't right. Now, that's not a problem of financial restatement. It's not a problem of SOX. It is a problem of risk management, and that was what Dodd-Frank was intended to resolve. In an era of rising interest rates, I think you are going to see more companies suffer not necessarily restatements, although possibly, but you might see suddenly some debt that they did think they had or some assets they thought they had on their balance sheet not worth what they expected. They might see cash flow projections in business not coming in as projected, and that leads more to a risk of bankruptcy as opposed to some sort of restatement or systemic failure. I don't know how much we want to geek out here, but I would make a distinction between an ordinary recession, like we all saw, say, in 1982, 1992, and 2002, and a financial crisis, which is what we saw in 2008. Those are not the same economic phenomena.
Right.
I do not think we are in for another financial crisis anytime soon. We may or may not be in for a recession, which is nobody's idea of a good time, but it is not the same as what we went through in 2008 and 2009.
So I've been thinking about Sarbanes-Oxley quite a bit, particularly since Mike Oxley passed away. And the corporate reporting that is required, part of it that I don't think corporations really do as well as kind of the accounting part is the risk part, and reporting risk and analyzing risk and reporting how that risk might impact them going forward. Anything from either Dodd-Frank or the Fed that might inform corporations to help them get a better handle on reporting of risk or analyzing of risk?
Well, I don't know about that specific question, but I do think about what regulations are there that exist that are pushing companies to think more intelligently about risks they should disclose. I think an underrated or often ignored part of risk disclosure is what you have to disclose in a proxy statement about executive pay and how executive pay may or may not affect your risk-taking culture and appetite. I think another thing is the simple management discussion and analysis in every annual report, and I know regulators would like that to be a more substantive and thoughtful discussion of risk when most of the time it's just boilerplate. I would look at those sort of avenues or those places to see if we could get better disclosure of risk. And one other point I wanted to raise, I think that what SOX and Dodd-Frank both did more than anything else was they really raised the awareness of the importance of whistleblowers, which in turn raises the importance of corporate culture and ethics overall. Protection for whistleblowers, bounty rewards for whistleblowers. I know companies don't like it. I know corporate compliance officers are not thrilled with it. But before that, you really could be a corporate whistleblower and try to do the right thing and get mowed down by corporate forces that do not like what you're doing. That's changed. And that's an important change because everybody now, there's a whole industry, there's a whole literature about how you can get people to speak up, how you can protect whistleblowers, how you can convince other people in other countries where whistleblowing is still very frowned on that it's okay to be a whistleblower. 15 years ago, the United States was in the same boat that it was not okay to be a whistleblower. I think that has changed, and probably more than anything else, that's what SOX and Dodd-Frank together have really done to kind of change the working calculus of compliance programs.
This is very interesting. I didn't realize we could geek out so much. But great.
Who knew?
Yeah. Well, let's go back to the 6 compliance events. Next up, or at least next in the blog post, was the Wal-Mart probe.
Yeah, like I said in the column that I feel like I'm a bit of a broken record talking about the Wal-Mart probe. I keep on saying this is the 3rd year in a row now I'm waiting for a settlement, and none has been forthcoming. But I think what's different now is that if you believe the press reports that have circulated over the last 12 months or so, it's very possible that this big, huge bribery scandal from Walmart that was going to be such a gigantic thing, this may not be a big thing. It does seem, according to some published reports, and I don't have any particular insight into what's going on with the Walmart investigation, but that there may be less evidence of really hardcore corruption and bribery and more facilitation payments, and that this might be much ado about nothing. That would be a big deal because this has cost everybody, the federal taxpayer who's funding the Justice Department, and certainly Walmart, who's paid hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, that we've invested a lot trying to get to the bottom of this. And if it turns out at the bottom that this was not a really insidious thing, that this was not on the scale of, say, Siemens or a Petrobras, but, something lesser, well, that's quite a statement, and that's quite a turnaround from what everybody had thought originally in 2012 when the New York Times had this plastered all over its front page. I have great respect for the compliance department at Walmart and Jay Jorgensen, the compliance chief there, trying to run a very complicated operation and trying to improve compliance for its own sake there. but still, if it turns out that they did all of this and that it's turned out to be more smoke than fire, that's really something. So that was one about Walmart. Some of the other predictions that I have are things I'm watching. I think that trying to straighten out the mess that is currently the state of international data transfers from the European Union to the United States, that's going to be a big deal. That in October, the European Union's highest court invalidated the safe harbor provision that allowed data transfers internationally. And at the same time, the European Union has then finalized, but has not yet adopted, but it is final, a plan for a new EU privacy directive. That whole situation is very fluid, and it really flies in the face of basic international business practice these days. You can't have data exist in one place but not necessarily in another, especially if you're a compliance officer dealing with employee data or you're investigating rogue customers or suppliers. The mechanisms that do exist right now to still get international data transfers appropriately, they're painstaking. They are not necessarily very comprehensive. You might have to keep getting consent over and over from the same person, or if you're disclosing to them that we'd like you to share your data so we can investigate you, I don't think that's going to work. But at the same time, there are very different cultural values between the United States and Europe. So how do we bridge all of this to make compliance and investigation functions work well? I don't know. But that's something that Europe is going to be struggling with this year.
And I guess I would just throw in to even further obfuscate the mix, one, the U.S. presidential election, because I think that's certainly turned heads in Europe, at least the campaign so far. But the second thing is the Paris attacks, which we saw in November, and Europe's attitude, I think, may have been shaken up a little bit by those attacks. But certainly in the United States, we heard a clarion of calls, or a clarion call for more oversight, more data available for government surveillance, and we may run ahead of even where the Europeans are. So I don't particularly know where those will shake out in the mix, but I think it certainly complicates an already fluid situation, as you called it.
Yeah, I think it's well worth noting that, especially in Europe right now, you have the intersection of data privacy and consumer rights, which, that is still a heated debate right there. But it is intersecting with immigration and terrorism and security policy because there is serious evidence to suggest at least some migrants are coming from the Middle East into Paris and perhaps fomenting terrorism activity. Or there are other questions about assimilating ethnic minorities in Paris. How has that worked or not worked? And, are there ethnic minorities that are committing terrorist acts? This is a very delicate matter straddling several different issues. And Europe is renowned for not solving political problems fast under the best of circumstances. This is requiring them to solve it under the worst of circumstances. And I don't know how that's going to unfold. But it is definitely going to be a difficult headache for compliance officers.
You've got two other very interesting areas to at least consider for this year. I would not have put them on top 5 or top 6 list, but you did. So why don't you tell us what they are and why they're on your list?
Sure. Well, this is a nod to the auditing end of the compliance audit industrial complex, that there are two issues that are really going to affect how financial reporting functions interact and perform with their external auditors, and as such, that will spill over to the more legal end of the compliance function as well. So the first is James Doty, and he is the current interim chairman of the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. The PCAOB is the firm or the regulator that oversees audit firms. Now, Jim Doty has been chairman since 2011. He has, I think, done a very good job at reviving what had been a very moribund sort of an agency. But his term expired in October. The question now is, what happens with him? He has been very aggressive. That has not endeared him too much to some parts of the auditing world. At the same time, he has endeared himself to the shareholder activists who always look a little bit askance at the audit firms. So will he be reappointed? Will he not be reappointed? Will he be left in some sort of interim limbo, which is where he is right now? My bet is that the Securities and Exchange Commission, and ultimately it's the SEC chairman, Mary Jo White, she's the one who's going to decide what happens to Jim Doty. I think she is not going to replace him, but I do not think she's going to nominate him for a second term either. I suspect, and I may be wrong, but I suspect she's going to leave him acting as an interim chairman throughout 2016. There are new elections in November and a new administration in 2017, and whoever those people are, they get to make that decision about what happens with the chairman then. But if I'm wrong, if Jim Doty got replaced tomorrow with a much more, I'll say, pro-audit firm chairman, that would certainly not go over well with some people, but it could potentially change how audit firms are overseen and therefore how they do business with you, the company client. So that's one. The other, I think, big sleeper issue is the implementation of the new accounting standard for revenue recognition. This is going to come into effect full force in 2018. By now, you should already be looking at how the new rule would change your reporting of revenue because you will need to come up with several years' worth of reported revenue numbers under that standard in 2018. So you're going to have to know how that means right now. How does that look for 2016? It redefines revenue recognition in terms of performance obligations. Have I performed my obligation to you? Yes, that means I get to recognize some part of the revenue right now, but maybe not all of it because I haven't done all of the performance obligations for the entire transaction. It's really shifting how you look at revenue to more of a contract that is being executed step by step. And therefore, all of your customer arrangements, your supplier arrangements, they're really going to get a very different treatment in some industries and for some transactions. It's not going to be easy. It's going to require looking at your workflow, looking at your IT systems, training your employees, training your sales staff. Most companies have not, I think, really done much to implement the rule as they should by now in this implementation cycle. But already we're seeing the SEC saying, we expect you to disclose how this is going, and we expect that with your end-of-year statements you're going to start to file in the next couple of weeks. And I think there will be a lot of executives or accounting executives who will be looking at their shoes rather than saying, oh, yeah, we're right on it. Some are right on it. Some will not be affected all that much by this, but I think many are going to be affected to some extent, and they are not yet prepared for that and don't know what they're supposed to disclose. So that's going to be a rather thorny issue throughout 2016 as well. And I think
let me follow up with
that's what I got.
Let me follow up on a couple of points on RevRec. I heard this raised quite extensively for the first time, at least to me, at the 2014 West Coast Compliance Week conference. And one of the things that struck me was that it seemed to me the new standard gave a lot more flexibility in terms of making a call on whether an obligation had been performed. You call that almost a contractual analysis, but when I heard the presentations, I felt it was almost a person-by-person standard, which really gave me a lot of concern for consistency around that. So that's just sort of observation one. But the second would be, don't we always have a lot of hand-wringing when a new standard comes in? We had the COSO 2013 standard come in, and people adjusted to that. Won't this be yet another adjustment?
I'll take the second question first. Yes, it will be an adjustment, but I think it's going to be a big adjustment because how they are defining revenue is going to spill beyond the corporate accounting department. A very easy example is that if your performance obligations change when you recognize revenue, that could affect the sales compensation plan for your sales reps. So now you've sucked in HR and your sales team as they're going to start thinking through their compensation structure, and will that need to be adjusted? You probably will need to adjust the software that you use for financial planning and analysis. Now, the financial software companies of the world are on this. They are working to deliver more modern and flexible systems that can accommodate the new standard. But not all of them have done everything that they need to, and then even if the product is ready, you, the company, you still have to implement it. So now you've sucked in the IT department. You might have contracts that are existing throughout the life of this transition cycle that were written in the old standard days but will now be applied in the new standard days. Will that need some sort of adjustment? Possibly. And now you've brought in the legal department. So is this something that companies will ultimately soldier on and get through? Yes, but this is not going to be something where, like the COSO framework, where the internal audit department or the compliance department was first and foremost in most of the company responsible for dealing with the framework change. And that really was focused on one or two departments taking the lead. This revenue change is going to touch on everybody everywhere throughout your whole enterprise. Your second point about consistency across multiple companies. Now that's very valid. The revenue standard is ultimately trying to move from what the accountants would call a bright line standard. So it's very exacting, very difficult to follow, but when you go through the maze and you do all the dance steps, you're at the final number, and that's that. This is moving to more of a principles-based approach. There's going to be a lot more judgment involved in deciding what an obligation is and when it has been fulfilled. There will be judgment about that internally with the company. There will be judgments your external auditor makes. There will be times that your judgments do not line up, but you will have to smooth those over. Those conversations may not be smooth. We don't know yet. The firms are working hard with their clients to make sure this is going well. But then you also will have different companies making different judgments or different firms auditing different companies making different judgments that, it remains to be seen how much consistency might be strained here. I know that FASB is still adjusting the final revenue standard even as we speak. They're supposed to issue the final language of it anytime in early January, but I imagine there will still be more technical changes or revisiting of it in the future. And then how companies and their audit firms digest this, like I said, it's still very much an open question. We haven't done a big change like this in many, many, many years. So it's going to be a big deal. It'll be a big deal this year, and I will have this on my list for the 2017 predictions a year from now. This is not going away.
Well, Matt, unfortunately, we're at the end of our time. This has really been a fascinating journey. I don't really get to geek out like this, so I'm looking forward to doing this again. But I did want to ask if anyone wanted to follow up with you directly. Could you give them your email again or other contact information?
Sure. The blog is at radicalcompliance.com, and the email address is just mkelly, K-E-L-L-Y, mkelly@radicalcompliance.com. And at the moment, it's just me and a dream here, so I'm always happy to hear from somebody else. Feel free to email me, whatever you got.
Living the dream. Okay, Matt. Well, thanks a lot, and looking forward to continuing the conversation.
All right. Thank you, Tom. Have a good day.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again, and I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. As you can tell, Matt Kelly and I really enjoyed geeking out in this, and I hope you enjoyed listening to our geekness. I look forward to having additional geek sessions with Matt in his new role as the Radical Compliance. The FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report is sponsored by Advanced Compliance Solutions. I hope you will go check out my website. Also, I want to remind you that I have an upcoming FCPA Masterclass in Houston, Texas on January 20 and 21 and 22. You can check out my website, Advanced Compliance Solutions, for more information. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening.